And the eco-zealots of Just Stop Oil were back on the streets of London today after one of their fallible flock shamelessly crashed the wedding of former Chancellor George Osborne last weekend. Remember this? Just despicable, and as revealed by the Mail on Sunday yesterday, that particular eco-hypocrite is 62-year-old Sheila Day, who cares so much about the planet that she jetted off on a 3-week holiday to Thailand after declaring her local Somerset town was in the grips of a climate emergency. Assuming Sheila flew, it's a long coach to Thailand. She would have produced carbon emissions equivalent to an average petrol car driving almost 20,000 miles. So, Neil, is this just another example of eco-terrorists perpetuating the most expensive and devastating lie in history?
Hi, Dan. I certainly do think the present way in which the weather and the climate is being described is a hoax and a scam, and I'm not afraid to be heard saying as much. There's a very repetitive pattern developing in relation to everything. You know, the pandemic was all about terrifying everyone every moment of the day, and yet the rules that were set in place by those in positions of power were flouted by those people in positions of power because it became glaringly obvious that they knew that there was nothing to fear. You see the same. The war in Ukraine rapidly became about terrifying everyone about the possibility of nuclear Armageddon. Now the weather and the climate is the next thing to fear, and it's getting old and tired that all the powers that be can think to do is keep everyone frightened all the time. And yes, what was particularly revealing was the way in which this eco campaigner, or whatever you want to call her, was plainly happy to go along as a useful idiot. Whether it was her own idea or whether she was persuaded to do what she did at Osborne's wedding, I don't know. But to go and demonstrate as though the climate was of the utmost importance, and then to care not a jot to the extent that she went off on a holiday to the other side of the world. I don't blame anyone for going on holidays to the other side of the world, but the hypocrisy that was demonstrated by her activities there, I think it's making the whole thing ridiculous. There's a terrible sense of crying wolf about all of this. You know, governments cannot just terrify their populations every time they want action taken or every time they want to push an ideology before the people realise that the game's up. You can't keep trying to terrify people and then making it plain that you yourself are not scared and expect people to take you seriously.
The problem is, Neil, I think we've seen over the past couple of years that the authorities working in lockstep with the mainstream media can actually quite effectively scare folk.
Well, yes, as I say, that Project Fear, fear porn, we've all become so used to it. I don't know about you, Dan, but it's increasingly getting to the point where if the powers that be want us to be frightened of something, I take that as the signal to have no fear. It's a very tired playbook that they keep working from. All the time we're supposed to be terrified. It's absolutely ridiculous, the way that they're pushing the climate terror. When did we get to the point where every weather map through the summer is in shades of red and black?
I know.
As though to create this illusion, they're turning the planet into what looks like an overcooked pizza. Blistering in black and bubbling as though the place is melting, and it's blatant and patent nonsense. In the latter part of the 19th century and in the first half of the 20th century, rivers ran dry in Europe. Some of the major rivers of Europe were so dry for certain periods that you could walk dry shod from one side of them to the other. Heat waves are a cyclical natural process. And then from the middle part of the 20th century, the 60s and 70s, the fear that was being pushed by the scientists, in inverted commas, was of the return of ice, that we were going to drift into an ice age. Until they got into the late 70s and early 80s when they decided that it was, here we go again, and they called it global warming. But then the science, so-called, couldn't back up the claims of global warming to such an extent that they had to change the fear label to climate change, which is at least descriptive of what climate does. All of this is just an incessant attempt to keep people frightened about one thing after another. For the last 3 years, we've just gone from pandemic to war to now the planet's about to burst into flames. And I think the lesson that people need to learn was to look at what that woman did at Osborne's wedding. She was prepared to, grab the headlines, drawing attention to the necessity to face up to climate change. And then, at the bottom of her bed, she's got her suitcase packed ready for her holiday in Thailand, which demonstrates that she's got no concerns whatsoever about the use of fossil fuels. These people, whether they're useful idiots or whether they're paid stooges, who are being manipulated by others behind the scenes in choreographed events just to drive a constant message of fear porn, is anybody's guess. But you're showing that footage there. How frightening for people, where you don't know when someone's coming at you. Maybe someone like George Osborne, in a high-profile position, maybe more used to, facing up to the threat of unknown people coming towards you. But for his bride, to suddenly be being covered with some unknown substance,
it could have been anything.
No idea.
I think it was.
It could have been anything. And shameful.
Absolutely. It was completely shameful behaviour. Neil Oliver, so great to speak, Neil. Neil, back 6 o'clock Saturday night here on GB News.